I am 78 years old this year, and there is a story I have carried in my heart for a lifetime, one I have never told in its entirety. It is the kind of story that can make the world turn its back on you, the kind of story that once painted me as a sinner, a disgrace, a woman without shame. I married my brother, and I bore him 5 children. That alone was enough for neighbors to whisper behind cupped hands, for church ladies to glare over him books, and for men on the street to spit in the dust when I walked past. But before you rush to judge, I ask you to listen until the very end. The truth is never as simple as the first line of a scandal. If you are patient, if you stay with me until I finish, you will understand the kind of love it was, the love that has ached in my chest every single day of my life, the love that changed my destiny forever. Before we begin, I'd like to know where you are as you hear my words. Are you listening from a bustling city with traffic humming outside your window? From a small quiet town where the crickets sing at night? Or perhaps from some distant place I have never seen? Wherever you are, imagine an old woman sitting across from you, hands folded in her lap, telling you the truth she has hidden for decades. That is where we are now, just you and me. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The year was 1955. I was 7 years old, living with my mother and older sister on a small patch of land in the Texas Hill Country, just outside a town called Oak Ridge. We called it a farm, but it was hardly more than a weather-beaten house with 3 rooms and a field stubborn enough to grow cotton and okra if you prayed hard enough for rain. The house had cracks in the walls so wide you could see daylight, and when the northerly winds came in winter, we stuffed rags in the gaps to keep the cold from slicing right through us. When it rained, we placed tin pans and enamel pots all over the floor to catch the drips from the sagging roof. The floor wasn't wood, just packed dirt swept daily with a broom made from dried willow twigs. I woke up before sunrise most mornings. By the time I opened my eyes, my mother, Eleanor, like me, was already standing over the wood stove, coaxing a flame to life, her face glowing in the orange light. The air smelled of coffee brewed in a tin pot and smoke from the stove. When we had it, breakfast was biscuits with black coffee. On lean mornings, it was just water mixed with molasses. If one of our hens laid an egg, Mama split it between me and my older sister, Margaret. My daily job was to fetch water from the well. 2 small tin buckets balanced on my head as I walked barefoot along the cracked earth, each step burning from the Texas summer sun. The water tasted faintly of iron and soil, but to us, it was the sweetest drink in the world. My toys were nothing more than what I could find, a dried gourd I'd carved a face into, scraps of cloth tied together for clothes, and a name I'd given her, Lily. I told Lily all my secrets, the way little girls do when no one else will listen. My father was not part of our lives. He had left for Houston when I was still a baby, promising to send for us. He never did. Mama never spoke his name, and Margaret and I learned early not to ask. His absence was like a hole in the middle of our home, a silence you could feel even in the loudest moments. Afternoons were for helping in the fields. Mama weeded rows of cotton and tended to the okra plants while I picked beetles off the leaves. The Texas sun was relentless, pressing on your head like a heavy hand, but Mama would always say, "The land only feeds the hands that work it, Ellie. If you rest too long, you'll go hungry." The food was simple. Okra stewed with onions, beans with corn cakes, the occasional rabbit if a neighbor was generous. Vegetables came when the rain did, and bread was a rare treat saved for weddings or baptisms. Bathing meant standing in the yard, pouring warm water from a bucket heated in the sun. On Sundays, we walked 3 miles into Oak Ridge to attend the little white-painted Baptist church. Mama wore her best calico dress, and she would smooth coconut oil through my hair to keep the dust from dulling it. The service was long and filled with hymns that were carried out through the open windows, but the best part was the fellowship afterward, the women talking in circles, the men trading news, children darting between their legs. That was my life. Hard, but ours. I had no reason to think it would change, until the day a boy arrived who would alter the course of my life forever. It was a Tuesday in August, the air so heavy with heat that the horizon shimmered. I was in the yard scattering corn for the chickens when I heard Mama's voice from inside the house. It wasn't her usual call. There was something different in it, surprise, mixed with a kind of tenderness I only heard when someone was hurt. I dropped the tin scoop and hurried in. There, in the center of our front room, stood a boy soaked to the skin, his clothes clinging to a frame so thin it seemed the wind could blow him away. His hair dripped onto the floor. His lips trembled. His eyes were red, not from the sun, but from hours of crying. Mama knelt before him, her weathered hands resting gently on his shoulders. "What happened to you, son?" she asked softly. The boy swallowed hard before speaking, his voice thin as paper. "The river. The river took my daddy." Mama's face changed then, a shadow passing over it. She understood before I did. The Trinity River had been swollen for weeks from summer storms, but the flood that August had been the worst in decades. Whole barns had been carried away. Livestock drowned. The boy's father had been among those trying to save trapped animals when the current swept him under. His mother had left the year before, running off with another man and leaving her husband and child behind. With his father gone, he had no one. The neighbors, already struggling, couldn't take him in. Mr. Whitaker from up near Cedar Bluff found him sitting on a muddy bank and brought him to our door. "I know you don't have much, Eleanor," Mr. Whitaker told Mama, "but you've got more heart than anyone I know. If you don't take him, I don't think the boy will last the week." Mama didn't hesitate. "Of course he can stay," she said. "There's always room for another plate at the table. God will see to it." She drew him a bath in a washtub, heating water over the stove. She scrubbed the mud from his hair and gave him one of my cousin's old shirts. Then she asked his name. "Nathaniel," he said, barely above a whisper. "Nathaniel Hayes." "Well, Nathaniel," Mama replied, "from this day on, you call me Mama, just like the girls do. This is your home now." That was the day Nathaniel became my brother, or at least, that's what we told the world. In the beginning, Nathaniel was quiet. He kept to himself, speaking little, watching us as though he was unsure whether he truly belonged. He slept in the small back room where we stored extra blankets and tools, on a straw mat Mama padded with old quilts. Even then, he never complained, not about the food, the bed, or the work. If anything, he seemed almost too grateful, thanking Mama so often that she once told him, "Son, you don't need to thank me for giving you a home. You're family now." But Margaret, my older sister, didn't see it that way. She was 16 then, already carrying the sharp tongue and sharper opinions that would follow her into adulthood. "Mama, we can barely feed ourselves," she grumbled one evening as we shelled peas on the porch. "Now we've got another mouth to feed. It's foolish." Mama never looked up from her work. "Child," she said, "bread shared is bread multiplied. God never lets a generous heart go hungry." And strangely, it felt like she was right. After Nathaniel came, the hens began laying more eggs than usual, our old milk cow started producing more, and there always seemed to be just enough to go around. Nathaniel threw himself into the daily work without complaint. He fetched water, split firewood, and learned to hoe cotton rows with the same quiet determination Mama had. He repaired loose boards on the chicken coop and mended fences. For the first time, there was a man, or rather, a boy determined to become one, in the house to take on the heavy work Mama and I had always struggled with. To the people in Oakridge, Nathaniel was simply Eleanor's boy, just as I was Eleanor's girl. When we went to church, he sat beside us like he'd always been there. When Mama introduced him to neighbors, she said, "This is my son Nathaniel." And no one asked questions. We grew up together in that dusty patch of Texas, and for years, I saw him as nothing more than my brother in name. We played together when chores allowed, tossing a ball made from tied rags, chasing fireflies in summer, daring each other to wade deeper into the Trinity River than we should. He was protective, even then. Once, when I slipped on the muddy bank and scraped my knee, he carried me all the way back to the house without letting me take a step, as if I were something precious. But it wasn't until I turned 14 that something began to change, though I couldn't have named it at first. It was the summer of 1962. The days were long and heavy with heat, the kind where the air itself seems to shimmer. Nathaniel was 17, taller than most grown men in town, with shoulders shaped from years of lifting, and skin the color of toasted pecans from working in the sun. His voice had deepened, his jaw had sharpened, and his brown eyes, once guarded, had softened in a way that made me notice them far more than I ever had before. At first, it was just small things. I found myself watching him when he worked, noticing the way he tied his hair back with a strip of cloth before chopping wood, the way he smiled faintly when a task was done well. Sometimes I caught myself listening to his voice when he was talking to someone else in the yard. It made me feel strange, warm, and anxious all at once, and it frightened me. He was my brother, wasn't he? At least, that's what the world saw him as. I told myself it was wrong, that it was just a passing fancy that would fade. But then came the day everything shifted. It was a Sunday afternoon in July. We'd walked home from the Oakridge Baptist service, Margaret grumbling the whole way about her dress sticking in the heat. The clouds gathered thick and dark, and halfway down the dirt road, the sky opened. It was a hard, soaking rain that sent Margaret running ahead, pulling her skirt up to keep it dry. Nathaniel and I ducked under the sprawling limbs of an old pecan tree, pressed close to keep from getting soaked through. I could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint scent of soap and sweat. I turned to say something, but found him already looking at me. It wasn't the casual glance of the boy I'd grown up with. His gaze lingered, heavy and searching, as if he was seeing me for the first time. "Ellie," he said softly, just for me to hear, "you look different lately." My stomach fluttered. "Different how?" I asked, though my voice was barely a whisper. "Beautiful," he said, without hesitation. I felt my face heat, though whether from the summer air or his words, I couldn't tell. "Don't say that," I murmured, glancing away. "Why not? It's the truth." The rain slowed, but neither of us moved. We just stood there under the pecan tree, the air between us charged with something I'd never felt before. Then Margaret's voice came from up the road, sharp and impatient. "You two planning to stay there all day?" We stepped apart quickly, walking the rest of the way in silence. But from that moment, something had changed. We both knew it. In the weeks that followed, we found reasons to be alone. If Mama needed someone to fetch firewood from the far grove, we volunteered together. If she needed a message taken to a neighbor, we made sure we were the ones to go. On those walks, we talked about things we'd never spoken of before, dreams of a home of our own, a piece of land, children running barefoot in the yard. One afternoon, sitting side by side at the edge of the dry creek bed, Nathaniel turned to me and asked, Ellie, what if I wasn't your brother? Would you think differently of me? I stared at him, my heart pounding. Don't say that, Nathan, I whispered. Why not? Because it's the truth. What I feel for you. It's not the way a brother feels. I should have told him to stop, to walk away, to forget it. But instead, I said the thing I'd been too afraid to admit even to myself. I feel it too. We both knew what it meant. We also knew it was dangerous. If anyone in Oak Ridge found out, we'd be shamed, maybe worse. We'll keep it quiet, Nathaniel said, his hand brushing mine. No one needs to know. I nodded, even as guilt twisted in my stomach. But the truth was, my heart had already chosen, and it didn't care about rules or appearances. 2 weeks later, in the far orchard, he kissed me for the first time. It was slow, hesitant, as if we both feared it might break us. When it ended, I found myself crying without knowing why. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing, I whispered. I've never felt anything like that. And so, a secret love began. Hidden in the shadows of our days, stolen in glances across the dinner table, whispered in the dark as the cicadas sang outside. We thought we could keep it hidden forever. We were wrong. We lived in the shadow of our secret for nearly 2 years. It became part of the air we breathed, invisible to everyone else, but filling every corner of our days. By then, I was 16 and Nathaniel had just turned 17. To the outside world, we were still Mama's 2 younger children, hard-working, respectful, inseparable. No one saw the quick touches when no one was looking, the long glances across the supper table, the whispered promises shared under the hum of the cicadas. We thought we were careful, though no one suspected. That illusion shattered one August afternoon in 1964. It was wash day, the kind of day that took every ounce of your energy. Mama had gone into Oak Ridge to buy medicine for her aching joints, and Margaret was in charge of the house chores. Nathaniel and I took the big bundles of laundry down to the bend in the creek, where the water ran shallow and clear. It was a scorcher, the kind of day where even the birds stayed silent in the heat. We worked side by side, scrubbing clothes on the flat limestone rocks, wringing them out, and laying them on the sun-bleached grass to dry. We laughed over nothing, over a dragonfly that kept landing on my headscarf, over a shirt Nathaniel claimed had shrunk because my ringing arms were too strong. When the last sheet was hung, we sat under the wide arms of an old pecan tree. Nathaniel took my hand, the way he always did when we were alone, and looked at me with that mix of longing and certainty that always left me breathless. Ellie, he said quietly, I wish we could just tell the truth. I wish I could walk into town with you on my arm and let everyone know you're mine. My chest tightened. I wanted that too, more than anything. But I shook my head. They'd never understand. To them, you're my brother. Mama raised you as her son. He squeezed my hand. Then we'll find a way. One day, we won't have to hide. And then he kissed me. Not the hurried, stolen kind we'd grown used to, but a long, unguarded kiss full of everything we'd been holding back. We were so lost in that moment we didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. What in God's name is this? The voice cut through the air like a whip. I jerked back to see Margaret standing just a few feet away, her mouth open, eyes wide with something between shock and disgust. I scrambled to my feet, my heart slamming against my ribs. Margaret! She threw up a hand, her face twisted. Don't you dare try to explain this filth to me. She turned on Nathaniel, her voice sharp as broken glass. You, taking advantage of Mama's kindness, creeping around with your own sister? You're disgusting. He's not my brother by blood, I shouted, my voice trembling. You know that. It doesn't matter, she snapped. Mama took him in. We've called him family for a decade. To the whole town, he's your brother, and this, she waved a hand between us, is a sin. Nathaniel tried to speak. Margaret, listen. Shut your mouth, she barked. You're lucky I don't tell the deacon right now. You won't get away with this. And with that, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward the house. We stood frozen for a long moment, the world suddenly heavier. I felt cold all over, despite the heat. She's going to tell Mama, I said, my throat tight. And then the whole town. Nathaniel stepped forward, gripping my shoulders. We'll talk to your mama first. We'll explain. Maybe. But his words died in the air. We both knew there'd be no explaining this to Mama in a way that would erase the shame Margaret would make sure to spread. When we returned to the house later, the front room was already thick with tension. Mama was home, sitting in her rocking chair, her hands covering her face. Margaret stood near the stove, her arms crossed like she was guarding a victory. Is it true? Mama's voice came from behind her hands, trembling. What Margaret told me, is it true you're carrying on with Nathaniel? I glanced at Nathaniel. His jaw was tight, but he gave a small nod, urging me to speak the truth. Yes, Mama, I said softly. But it's not. It's not something dirty. We love each other. Truly. Her hands dropped, and the look on her face cut straight through me. Hurt. Disbelief. Disgust. How can you say that? You were raised together as brother and sister. He calls me Mama. And you, her voice cracked. You call him brother. Nathaniel stepped forward. Mrs. Eleanor, you know I'm not your son by blood. But I've loved Ellie for years. I respect her, Mama shot to her feet, her voice suddenly hard. A son of the heart is no different from a son of the blood, Nathaniel. I took you in when you had nothing. I fed you, gave you a bed. And this is how you repay me. Nathaniel swallowed hard. I never meant disrespect. But I can't change how I feel. I want to marry her. I want to give her a home. Mama let out a bitter laugh. Marry her? No preacher in Texas would marry you. No judgment either. Folks already think you're siblings. It would be a scandal of the likes of which this family wouldn't survive. By evening, the news had already started to spread. Margaret had told her friend Mabel, who told Mrs. Lowry, who told anyone willing to listen. In Oak Ridge, gossip traveled faster than a thunderstorm, and by nightfall, our family name was on every tongue. That was when Uncle Charles arrived. Big, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could rattle a barn door, he came stomping into the house like a man set on delivering judgment. Where is he? He barked. Where's that boy who thinks he can shame this family? Nathaniel stepped out from the back room, his chin lifted. I'm here, sir. Without warning, Uncle Charles shoved him hard against the wall. You no good, ungrateful wretch. Eleanor took you in as her own, and you sneak around with her daughter? You ought to be whipped and run out of town. Nathaniel didn't raise a hand to defend himself. I love her, he said steadily. I always will. And she loves me. That's the truth. Love. Uncle Charles spat the word like it was poison. Love doesn't break the laws of God. You'll leave tonight, boy, or I'll see to it you regret staying. Mama's voice was quieter, but just as final. Nathaniel, you have to go. I can't have you here after this. Not now. Those words broke something inside me. Mama, please. But she didn't look at me. It's for the best, Ellie. They locked me in my room while Nathaniel gathered his few belongings, a couple of shirts, a worn Bible, the pocketknife he'd had since he was a boy. I pressed my ear to the door, desperate to hear his voice one more time. Before he left, he called softly through the wood. "Ellie, no matter where I am, I'll wait for you." And then the sound of the front door opening, footsteps fading into the night, and the world going silent except for the ache in my chest. The night Nathaniel left, the air inside our house felt different. It was heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the shouting, the accusations, and the sorrow. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The space he used to occupy, his laughter, his quiet humming while he worked, the sound of his boots on the porch, was a silence that rang louder than any noise. Mama wouldn't speak to me beyond what was necessary. Margaret was worse. She took every chance she got to throw sharp little jabs my way. "You'll never marry a decent man now, Ellie. People don't forget filth like that." Her words were like grit in a wound, and I learned to keep my head down just to survive each day. For 3 long weeks, I barely stepped outside. Mama kept me close, perhaps afraid I'd run off after him, and truthfully, she was right to be afraid. That thought sat in the back of my mind every single day, finding Nathaniel, no matter the cost. But I didn't know where he'd gone or how to reach him. Then one Thursday morning in late September, as I was hanging laundry on the line, I saw Mr. Whitaker coming up the dirt path. He was the same man who had brought Nathaniel to our home all those years ago. His hat was low over his brow, and his boots kicked up little puffs of dust as he walked. He greeted Mama at the porch in low tones, then stepped around the side of the house toward me. "Eleanor," he said quietly, his eyes flicking toward the windows to make sure no one was listening. "Nathaniel sent me." My heart leapt before I could stop it. "Where is he?" "He's staying with his cousin Victor in Maplewood," Mr. Whitaker said. "He asked me to tell you. If you still want to marry him, you can. He's already spoken to the justice of the peace there. Nobody in that town knows the two of you as kin. You can get a marriage license without trouble." The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. "When?" I whispered. "Tomorrow at first light," he said. "He'll be waiting at the old crossroads by the split branch pecan. You'll need to leave early so no one stops you." That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the shadows on the ceiling. My mind was a storm, torn between the love I felt and the guilt of leaving Mama behind. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Nathaniel's voice through the door that night. "No matter where I am, I'll wait for you." I knew then I couldn't let him keep waiting. Before the sun rose, I rose instead. I dressed quietly, packed a small bundle, one skirt, one blouse, a change of underclothes, my rosary, and a little pressed flower I'd saved since childhood. I counted the coins I'd hidden away from selling eggs over the years, not much, but enough for the road. I left a note for Mama on the table, the words plain and halting in my uneven handwriting. "Mama, I love you more than anything. But I also love Nathaniel, and we are going to be married. One day I hope you will understand. Your daughter, Ellie." The sky was still deep blue when I stepped outside. The ground was cool beneath my feet as I slipped down the back path toward the crossroads. Every sound made me jump, a rustle in the brush, the call of a morning bird, as if Margaret or Mama might appear to drag me back. When I reached the split branch pecan, there he was. Nathaniel stood leaning against the trunk, his old leather suitcase at his side. When he saw me, his whole face lit, and I ran to him without a second thought. "I knew you'd come," he said, pulling me into his arms. "I couldn't stay," I replied, my voice breaking. "I can't live without you." We didn't waste another moment. The road to Maplewood was long and unpaved, stretching through fields and patches of pine. We walked most of the way, stopping only to drink from creeks and rest in the shade. My sandal broke halfway there, and Nathaniel carried my bundle for me, insisting I ride on his back for part of the way when the sharp rocks made my feet bleed. Just a little farther, Ellie, he said every time I slowed. We're almost there. We arrived in Maplewood late in the afternoon, our clothes dusty, our faces flushed from the heat. The town was small, its main street lined with a handful of brick buildings, a diner, a feed store, and the courthouse. Nathaniel took me straight to Victor's house, a modest little place with whitewashed siding and a neat porch. Victor was a tall man with sun-leathered skin, and his wife Marilyn was quick to usher us in. "So this is the girl," Victor said with a knowing smile. "You've picked yourself a strong one, Nathan." Marilyn gave me a warm hug and led me to the back where a wash basin and a fresh dress were waiting. "You'll want to look your best for tomorrow," she said, her eyes twinkling. That night, we slept under separate roofs, me in the spare bed in Marilyn's sewing room, Nathaniel on a cot in Victor's shed. It was the last night we would ever sleep apart. The morning came bright and clear. Marilyn helped braid my hair and lent me a pale yellow dress she'd worn years before. She dabbed a touch of rose water behind my ears and pressed my hands in hers. "You'll remember this day for the rest of your life," she said softly. At the Maplewood courthouse, Judge Carter met us in his small, book-lined office. The ceremony was simple. A few words from the law, a pair of questions, our signatures on the paper. Nathaniel's hand was steady as he wrote his name. Mine trembled so much the letters came out crooked. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Carter said, stamping the document. "May God bless this union." Victor and Marilyn were our witnesses. Afterward, we celebrated with a meal at the little diner on Main Street, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and biscuits so fluffy they nearly fell apart in our hands. Nathaniel slipped a simple tin ring onto my finger under the table, whispering, "Now you're mine forever." We rented a room from an older widow named Mrs. Henderson, who had a small cottage out back of her house. It wasn't much, just a narrow bed, a rickety table, and a little wood stove, but it was ours. That first night as husband and wife, we lay side by side in the dark, listening to the wind rustling through the pecan trees. For the first time in years, I felt truly safe. We had no idea the struggles that lay ahead. But in that moment, with Nathaniel's hand in mine and the faint glimmer of my wedding ring catching the moonlight, I believed we could weather anything. The first months of our marriage felt like living inside a dream. The cottage we rented from Mrs. Henderson was barely big enough for the bed and table, but every morning, I woke up with Nathaniel beside me and thought, "This is home." We made do with what we had, frying cornmeal cakes on the little wood stove, washing clothes in a tin tub out back, and heating water in a kettle for baths. Nathaniel worked with Victor in construction, hauling lumber, mixing mortar, and laying brick in the sweltering sun. I kept the cottage clean, cooked our meals, and patched his shirts when the seams gave way. We had nothing extra, but it didn't matter. We had each other, and that was enough. 3 months after the wedding, I began waking with a queasiness that wouldn't go away. Marilyn, wise as ever, took one look at me and smiled knowingly. "Ellie, I think you've got more than biscuits in that belly," she teased. Her words sent my heart racing. The thought of having a child with Nathaniel filled me with a joy so fierce it scared me. When I told him that night, his reaction was pure, unfiltered delight. He lifted me off the floor and spun me around in the little kitchen, laughing until his eyes shone. "Our first baby," he whispered into my hair. "We're going to be a real family now." The months passed slowly. My belly grew, and so did our worries. Nathaniel's wages barely covered food and rent. I learned to stretch every penny, saving bacon grease to cook with, sewing dish rags into baby clothes. Still, there were nights when the cupboard was almost bare. When the time came, we couldn't afford a hospital berth. Marilyn introduced me to a midwife named Mrs. Holt, a small, spry woman whose hands seemed to carry some ancient knowledge. On a cool March morning in 1965, she helped bring our daughter into the world. We named her Clara, after my grandmother. She was tiny, with a tuft of dark hair and a cry that could rattle the walls. Nathaniel sat beside me for hours, holding her as though she might break, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't think it was possible to love anyone more than I love you," he said, "but now I know I was wrong." Clara slept in a drawer lined with soft rags. Her first pacifier was a scrap of cloth I'd knotted and dipped in warm water. We had no cradle, no store-bought toys, only love, and that seemed to be enough. 2 years later, Matthew came along. Then Sarah. Then Luke. And finally, little Emily in 1973. 5 children in 8 years. Each birth brought joy, but also new challenges. More mouths to feed, more clothes to mend, more worry over how far Nathaniel's paycheck could stretch. When the rent climbed beyond what we could manage, we moved to a slightly larger clapboard house on the edge of town. It had a patch of land behind it, and Nathaniel planted it full cotton, okra, sweet potatoes, even a row of tomatoes. I raised chickens in a makeshift coop and sold eggs at the market to buy flour and sugar. The children grew up in the fields and garden, chasing each other between rows, helping gather eggs, and learning early that food didn't just appear on a table. It came from hard work. On good days, we had cornbread with beans and fried okra. On bad days, we made a thin soup from whatever we could find and prayed for tomorrow to be better. The worst year came in 1970, when Emily was still a baby. A drought settled over the hill country and refused to lift. The earth cracked open under our feet. Our crops withered before they could bear, and even the chickens grew thin and stopped laying. Nathaniel walked miles each morning looking for odd jobs, mending fences, repairing roofs, but often came home empty-handed, his face drawn with fatigue and frustration. I learned to make broth from a single bone, stretching it with wild greens the children gathered. There were nights I went to bed with an empty stomach so the little ones could have a second helping. One evening, after tucking the children into bed with bellies only half full, I sat at the table and buried my face in my hands. Nathaniel came in quietly, smelling of dust and sweat, and knelt beside me. "Look at me, Ellie," he said gently. When I lifted my head, his eyes held that steady light I'd loved since I was a girl. "This hunger is in our bellies," he said. "But it's not in our hearts. Our hearts are full, and that's what's going to carry us through." And somehow he was right. We survived that year. When the rains returned, the garden thrived again. The hens began to lay, and slowly, the table filled. Nathaniel built our bed with his own hands from salvaged wood, smoothing every board so I wouldn't catch a splinter. At night, we lay side by side, talking softly about the next day's work, the children's needs and dreams that seemed far away but never impossible. Sometimes he'd ask, "Ellie, do you ever regret leaving Oak Ridge? Leaving your family for me?" And every time, I'd answer the same, "Never. I'd rather go hungry by your side than eat at a table far from you." We never told the children the truth of how the world once saw us. To them, we were simply Mama and Daddy, who loved each other and worked hard for the family. They grew up seeing the example of two people who faced life's hardships together, never turning away from one another. Clara, our eldest, was curious and bright, always asking questions. Matthew had his father's patience and his knack for fixing things. Sarah was mischievous, climbing trees in her Sunday dress. Luke was quiet, preferring to follow Nathaniel in the garden. Emily, the youngest, clung to my skirts like a shadow. On Sundays, we all walked to church together, the children in hand-me-down clothes I'd patched a dozen times. We sat in the back pew, singing hymns while the little ones fidgeted beside us. Afterward, we'd share a simple lunch and sometimes walk to the river so the children could wade in the shallows while Nathaniel fished. Despite the lean years, there were moments so full of laughter and love that I sometimes forgot the rest of the world existed. I would watch Nathaniel playing with the children, hear the way he told them stories at bedtime, stories where courage and kindness always won, and think, we've built something good here. Something real. We had no money in the bank, no fine possessions, but we had what mattered. And as long as we had that, I believed we could weather anything. I didn't know then that the next great change was already on its way, not in the form of hardship, but in the shape of a figure from my past walking down our dirt road, bringing with her the one thing I thought I'd never have again. It was a late summer afternoon in 1976, the kind where the air hangs heavy and the sky glows with the promise of rain that might never come. Nathaniel was in the back garden, teaching Luke how to stake the tomato plants, while I sat at the table mending one of Emily's dresses. The younger children were sprawled on the floor, drawing with stubs of colored pencils we'd saved from the market. The sound of footsteps on the dirt path out front made me pause. We didn't get many visitors. Folks in Maplewood kept to themselves, so the sight of a figure coming through the gate set my heart beating faster. She was smaller than I remembered, her once dark hair streaked through with gray, but her walk, I would have known it anywhere. My hands went cold. Mama. She stopped in the yard, clutching a small, battered suitcase in one hand and a folded shawl in the other. For a long moment, she just looked at me, her eyes searching my face the way they used to when I was a girl. Yes, Ellie, she said softly. It's me. For a second, I couldn't move. All the years of silence between us seemed to gather in the air, thick and unyielding. Then I crossed the yard in 3 quick steps and threw my arms around her. We clung to each other, neither speaking, until Nathaniel appeared at the back of the house, wiping his hands on his trousers. His eyes widened when he saw her, but he didn't hesitate. He came forward and held out his hand. Mrs. Eleanor, he said, voice steady but respectful. She took it, studying him in a way that made me hold my breath. Nathaniel, she said quietly, you look older, stronger. Life's been working you hard. He nodded. Life works everyone hard, ma'am. I invited her inside, the children staring wide-eyed from their spots on the floor. Mama's gaze lingered on each of them, softening as she took in their faces. So these are my grandchildren, she murmured. The afternoon passed in a strange mix of comfort and unease. We sat at the table while I poured her sweet tea and sliced bread from the loaf I'd baked that morning. Nathaniel brought in a plate of fresh tomatoes from the garden, setting them down without a word. Finally, when the children had gone outside to play, Mama looked at me across the table. I've thought about you every day, Ellie. Every single day. And I've thought about what I said, and how I drove you away. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I didn't speak. I was wrong, she said, her voice cracking. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing right by God and by the family name. But I see now I was just protecting my pride. And that pride cost me my daughter for 11 years. I swallowed hard. Mama, I loved him then, and I love him now. We've made a life together, even when it was hard. And I don't regret leaving, not for one moment. But I always wished you could be part of it. Her eyes welled with tears. I want to be Ellie. If you'll have me. Nathaniel sat quietly, letting the words settle between us. When Mama finally turned to him, there was no judgment in her face, only something closer to weariness and humility. I can see now, she said slowly, that you've kept my daughter safe, and you've worked for her. You've given her children and a home. I may not have understood your love before, but I can't deny it's real. Nathaniel's voice was quiet, but firm. Mrs. Eleanor, I never set out to hurt you or shame you. I just couldn't turn my heart away from Ellie. And I never will. For a long moment, Mama just looked at him. Then she gave a small nod, as if she'd come to some private conclusion. You've done right by her, she said. That night, she stayed in Emily's bed, while the little one curled up with me and Nathaniel. We didn't speak much before sleep, but the weight of years between us seemed lighter somehow. In the days that followed, Mama settled into our home as if she'd never left my life. She taught the girls to sew straight seams and told the boys stories about the land in Oak Ridge. She helped me with the cooking, her biscuits rising taller than mine ever had. But the most unexpected moment came one Sunday morning. We had dressed for church, the children fussing over whose shoes were cleanest, when Mama stopped me at the door. Ellie, she said, I've been thinking. When you and Nathaniel married, you had to do it in secret. I wasn't there. And I should have been. So, would you let me give you a proper blessing now? I stared at her, unsure I'd heard right. A blessing? She nodded. It's late, too late for me to undo the years, but not too late for me to stand beside you in your marriage. The lump in my throat was so tight I could barely nod. That evening, after supper, Mama had us stand together in the yard under the pecan tree Nathaniel had planted the year Emily was born. The children lined up beside her, and she laid her hands on both our shoulders. Lord, she said, her voice trembling, forgive me for the years I turned my back on this love. I see now that it was your work all along. Bless this man and this woman, and bless the family they've built together. Keep them in your mercy until the end of their days. By the time she finished, tears streaked my cheeks and Nathaniel's as well. Mama hugged us both, and for the first time in over a decade, I felt my family was whole again. Later, as the children ran barefoot through the grass, Nathaniel slipped his arm around my waist. You got your mama back, he said softly. And you got her blessing, I replied. We stood there a long while, watching the sun sink behind the trees. It felt like a chapter had closed, not the story of us, but the part that had been shadowed by anger and separation. I didn't know then that peace wouldn't last forever, that life still had its cruel tests waiting for us. But for that season, we lived in something close to harmony, and it was more precious than gold. The years after Mama's return were some of the sweetest we ever knew. She stayed with us until her health began to fade, and even then, she was surrounded by the family she once feared would shame her. Nathaniel and I worked side by side, raising the children into grown men and women who knew the value of love, loyalty, and grit. But life has a way of turning without warning. It was late autumn in 1984 when Nathaniel first complained of feeling tired in the bones, as he put it. I thought nothing of it at first. We were both past 40, after all, and years of hard work leave their mark. But as the weeks went by, the tiredness deepened. He'd come in from the garden and sink into the chair without touching his supper. Some nights I'd wake to find him sitting on the porch, staring out at the dark, his breath slow and heavy. One Sunday after church, I finally insisted he see Dr. Mathers in town. Nathaniel didn't argue, which scared me more than if he'd fought me on it. The following week, we sat in that small, sterile office while Dr. Mathers cleared his throat and delivered the kind of news you don't prepare for. It was his heart, badly weakened. Surgery might help, but it was risky, and even if it worked, the doctor warned, the damage was already too great. Nathaniel had months, maybe a year. When we left the office, we didn't speak. The gravel crunched under our feet as we walked to the truck, the wind sharp with the scent of burning leaves. Halfway home, Nathaniel reached over and took my hand. "Ellie," he said quietly, "I don't want you to cry over me. We've had more years together than I ever dreamed we'd get. That's enough for me." "It's not enough for me," I whispered. From then on, time became something we noticed in every small way, the way the light fell across his face in the mornings, the way his laugh seemed even more precious, the weight of his hand in mine at night. We didn't talk much about the end, but it hung there unspoken, like the shadow of a storm. By spring, his strength had waned. The children, now grown with families of their own, came often, filling the house with voices and the smells of shared meals. Nathaniel would sit among them, smiling, even when the effort of staying upright left him breathless. One night, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, he asked me to sit with him on the porch. The moon was bright, silvering the tops of the pecan trees. "You remember," he began, "that night you met me at the crossroads? You left everything behind to walk that road with me. I still can't believe you did that." I smiled through the tightness in my chest. "I'd do it again tomorrow." He nodded slowly. "Promise me you'll tell our story one day. All of it. People might not understand, but maybe it'll help someone who loves in a way the world says they shouldn't." "I promise," I said. Nathaniel passed away in late June, just as the sun was rising. I was at his side, holding his hand, when his breathing slowed and then simply stopped. The stillness that followed was unlike anything I'd ever felt, as if the entire house knew he was gone and bowed into silence. The funeral was small, just family and a few neighbors who'd known him for years. Clara stood beside me, her arm around my shoulders, while Luke read from the Book of Psalms. Mama had passed 2 years before, but I imagined her standing there too, her hands folded, her eyes full of the forgiveness she'd given us. After everyone left, I stayed by his grave until the shadows grew long. I pressed my palm to the cool earth and whispered, "I kept my promise. I'll tell you all." And so I did, though not right away. For years, I carried our story close, sharing pieces only with the children. But as I grew older, I realized that if I didn't speak it, it would be buried with me. So here I am, telling it now. Not because it's easy, it isn't. Even after all this time, the memory of that first kiss by the creek, the night I left home, the sight of him holding our babies for the first time, it all lives in me as if it happened yesterday. People might hear this and shake their heads. They might call it wrong. They might say love like ours should never have been. But those people didn't see the way Nathaniel looked at me across a crowded room, or how he worked his hands raw to keep food on our table, or how, in the quiet hours, he'd rest his head against mine like it was the safest place he knew. They didn't live the years we lived. They didn't raise our children, bury our dead, or survive the droughts, both of the land and of the heart. They don't know what it is to love someone so deeply that you'd walk away from your entire life just to keep holding their hand. And if there's one thing I've learned in these long years since he left, it's this. The world will always have opinions, but the world doesn't get to live your love for you. Now, in the quiet evenings when the house is still, I sometimes sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip low over the pecan trees Nathaniel planted. I imagine him beside me, his hand warm over mine. And I know that in some way, he still walks with me, maybe not in body, but in every choice I make, in every breath I take. We had a love that broke rules, crossed lines, and refused to die, not even when death itself came calling. This is the story I promised to tell. Our story. Against every oath, against every whisper of doubt, we lived it. And I'd live it all over again. You've sat with me through shadows and light, through the kind of love that isn't written neatly into storybooks. Some truths, they ripen slowly, like fruit that will turn bitter if plucked too soon. That's why I kept this story folded away in the corners of my heart for so many years. Because when wounds are fresh, you guard them like secrets, and when the scars come, you learn which ones can be shown. I tell it now because I've lived through enough seasons to know love is rarely tidy, and courage is often just choosing to stay when the world tells you to run. If you've ever loved in silence, if you've ever carried a truth too heavy to speak, I want you to know you are not alone. What tries to break you can also shape you, and even the deepest cracks let the light through. My children, and their children, will carry this story long after my voice is gone. Not because it is perfect, but because it is ours, built on dust and bread crusts, on whispered promises and mornings when we had nothing but each other. That's what I leave behind, the proof that love, in its truest form, can weather any drought. If my story has touched something quiet inside you, let it be known. Leave your thoughts below. Tell me where you're listening from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you wish, walk with me again by subscribing, so my voice can keep finding you even in the still hours. My name is Eleanor May Whitfield. Once I was just a girl who ran away at dawn. Now I am a woman who has lived enough to know that even endings can bloom like spring. And so I close this chapter and plant the last seed.